Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The afternoon draped itself over the village of Swan Lap like a worn shawl, its threads woven with the scent of damp earth and the faint tang of cow dung that lingered in the air. Tieu Nuong, a 16-year-old girl with eyes that held the depth of a moonless night, stood in the middle of a muddy field, her hands gripping a hoe as if it were the last tether to a life she could no longer call her own. Her faded green shirt, patched at the elbows and frayed at the hem, clung to her thin frame, its threads unraveling like the hope she buried beneath the weight of her uncle's betrayal. The field stretched before her, a patchwork of weeds and sorrow, its edges blurring into the mist that hung low over the village. In the distance, the river murmured a soft lament, its silver ribbon winding through the village like a thread of dreams, reflecting the gray sky above. The sky hung heavy, gray as the smoke curling from the kitchen roofs, a quiet promise of rain that seemed to echo the storm within her heart. Tieu Nuong drove the hoe into the earth with a rhythm born of necessity, each stroke a silent cry against the chains that bound her. The earth was stubborn, its clay clinging to the blade like a memory that refused to let go, and her hands, small, calloused, and trembling, ached with the weight of her labor. She was a prisoner in the house of a mistress named Bang, a woman whose voice cut like the wind on a winter night, her heart hardened by the debts she collected like stones. Tieu Nuong had been sold into this life to repay her uncle's debt of 50 million dong, a betrayal that stung sharper than the blisters on her palms. Her uncle had come to her with a smile as warm as the morning sun, his voice soft with promises of a better tomorrow. "Come back, Nuong," he had said, his eyes crinkling like the edges of a worn map. "We'll start again." But those promises had turned to ash, leaving her here in this field, with nothing but the ache in her bones and the memory of a man named Chung. Chung was the whisper of dawn in her endless night, a carpenter from a neighboring village whose hands carved dreams from wood, whose smile was a lantern in the gloom of her days. They had met at the market one rainy afternoon, where the scent of fresh herbs mingled with the damp earth, and the air buzzed with the chatter of vendors. He had helped her carry a basket of vegetables, his hands steady and sure, and his laughter had been a melody that warmed her soul. "I'll build you a roof that keeps out the rain," he had said, his eyes crinkling like the ripples on the river, his voice a promise that wrapped around her heart like a vine. In that moment she had felt seen, not as a debtor's niece, but as a girl with dreams as vast as the sky. They had sat by the river that day, the water lapping at the bank like a gentle heartbeat, and he had spoken of a future where they could be together, where the world would be kind. Now that promise was a distant star, twinkling faintly in the storm of her reality, a beacon she clung to in the darkness of her days. She paused, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her eyes tracing the river's path to where it disappeared into the mist. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth, the faint crow of a rooster echoing through the village, a reminder of the life that hummed beyond her reach. The village was a tapestry of sounds and scents, the distant cluck of chickens, the rhythmic creak of a water buffalo cart, the faint smoke rising from a kitchen fire, curling like a prayer into the gray sky. But for Tieu Nuong, these were the sounds of a world she could not touch, a life that had slipped through her fingers like the river's current. "Will you come for me, Chung?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, her heart a tangle of longing and fear. The river, with its endless flow, seemed to carry her words away, a silent prayer to the man who had become her beacon, her hope, her dawn. She thought of her parents, their laughter a distant echo in the village, their faces blurred by time, their warmth a memory she clung to like a fading ember in the chill of her solitude. Her mother's voice, soft as the rustle of banana leaves, had once sung her to sleep, and her father's hands, rough but gentle, had lifted her onto his shoulders to watch the moon rise over the rice fields. Now they were gone, leaving her alone with an uncle whose betrayal had carved a wound deeper than any blade. A voice rough as the bark of a mango tree broke her reverie. "Hurry up, girl," Truong barked, his frame slouched against a tree, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his phone. He was the mistress's son, a boy whose yellow-dyed hair stood out like a flame against the muted greens of the village, his days consumed by games and cigarettes, his heart a barren field where kindness had long withered. "I'm hungry, finish this field so we can go home," he said, his fingers tapping the screen with the rhythm of a drum, his voice sharp with impatience. Tieu Nuong nodded, her heart sinking like a stone in the river, her hands trembling as she returned to her task, the hoe a heavy burden in her small hands. She glanced at Nuong, his yellow hair a stark contrast to the earth around him, a symbol of his indifference to her suffering. She had been hired out to this field for the day, a job that paid 100,000 dong, a small sum that was meant to ease the mistress's wrath but had instead become a source of pain. Nuong had stolen half her wages, 50,000 dong, to buy cigarettes, leaving her to face the mistress's fury when she returned with only half the expected amount. "Why is it only 50,000 dong?" the mistress had roared, her voice a storm that rattled the bamboo walls of their home, her eyes cold as the river at dawn. "Did you take it, you good-for-nothing girl?" Nuong had tried to explain, her voice a trembling leaf in the wind, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but Nuong had stood by, his silence a betrayal as sharp as a knife, his yellow hair a mocking sun in the gloom of her shame. She had felt the weight of those words, each one a stone in the river of her heart, dragging her deeper into the depths of her despair. The truth had come to light, a fragile ray of dawn in the storm, as Nuong confessed under the weight of his mother's anger. "I took it to buy cigarettes," he had muttered, his face flushed with shame, his hands clenched into fists, the yellow of his hair a fading flame in the twilight of his guilt. The mistress had turned her wrath on him, her voice a thunderclap, her hands gesturing to his hair with disdain. "Dye it black by sundown," she had commanded, her eyes cold as the earth after rain. "You shame this family with your foolishness." But her anger had not spared Nuong, whose hands had faltered the day before, breaking a bowl in a moment of dizzy exhaustion. "And you," the mistress had said, her voice a blade, "you'll work for free for a month to pay for that bowl." Nuong felt her breath catch, her hands trembling as she drove the hoe into the earth, her heart a river of sorrow and longing. The broken bowl with its jagged edges was a mirror to her fractured dreams, each piece a shard of the life she had lost. She remembered the moment it had slipped from her hands, the dizziness that had clouded her vision, the hunger that gnawed at her stomach like a relentless beast. She had been fetching water from the well, her arms aching from the weight of the bucket, her head spinning from the lack of food, when the bowl had fallen, shattering on the stone floor like her hope. The mistress's words had followed, each one a lash against her already bruised spirit, and she had felt the tears well in her eyes, hot and heavy, but she had refused to let them fall. "I can't go on like this," she whispered, her voice a soft lament, her eyes glistening with tears that refused to fall, the rain within her soul held back by the dam of her resilience. She thought of Chung, of the way his smile had lit her world, of the promise that glowed in his eyes, a promise that was her anchor, her light, her hope in the storm. The field around her was silent save for the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant crow of a rooster, and the faint hum of the river, a symphony of the village that felt both achingly familiar and impossibly far away. Meanwhile, in a village cradled by the river's bend, Chung stood at the edge of a tea shop, his hands stained with the dust of the road, his eyes searching the horizon like a fisherman seeking the shore. The rain had begun to fall, a gentle drizzle that kissed the earth, its droplets a soft caress against his weathered skin. He had been searching for Nuong for days, his heart a vessel of longing, his mind a storm of worry that threatened to drown him. "Nuong," he had called at her tent, his voice a prayer, but the tent had been empty, its thatched roof sagging under the weight of the rain, its shadows a canvas of his fears. He had walked through the village, his steps heavy with the weight of his worry, his eyes scanning every face, hoping for a glimpse of her, but she was nowhere to be found. He had turned to a shopkeeper, a woman he called Chi, her eyes soft as the moonlight on the river, her hands resting on the counter like a bridge between worlds. "Chioi, do you have any girls working here around 16 years old?" he had asked, his voice a melody of hope, his heart a field of worry and love. The shopkeeper had shaken her head, her voice a soft breeze, but then her eyes had lit with a quiet revelation, her hands gesturing to the distance. "I heard a story," she had said, her voice a whisper of possibility. A neighbor spoke of a girl 16 years old, forced by her uncle to work as a laborer to pay a debt. She was sent to Swan Lap, to a boss named Bang. Chung had felt his heart leap, a fish breaking the surface of the river, his hands trembling as he nodded, his eyes glistening with a quiet hope. "It could be her," he had whispered, his voice a prayer, his heart a song of love and longing. But beneath the hope there was a shadow, a gnawing fear that clawed at his mind, whispering doubts that she might be lost to him forever. He had spent sleepless nights, his thoughts a tangled net of worry, his heart heavy with the weight of her absence. The thought of her suffering, alone and forsaken, was a blade that cut deeper with each passing day, leaving him on the edge of collapse, his spirit fraying like the edges of her faded shirt. He had seen her in his dreams, her eyes filled with tears, her hands reaching for him, but each time he reached back, she slipped away, swallowed by the darkness of his fears. He had called a motorbike taxi, his voice steady as the river's flow, his hands trembling as he spoke to the driver, a man named Mr. Ha. "Take me to Swan Lap," he had said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, the rain falling harder now, its droplets a chorus of hope, a melody of reunion. "It's 200,000 dong," Mr. Ha had replied, his hands gripping the handlebars, the motorbike a steed in the service of love. Chung rode through the rain, his heart aflame in the storm, its light flickering with the weight of his worry. The muddy paths of Swan Lap stretched before him, each turn a question, each mile a prayer, the rain a mirror to the tears he refused to shed. Back in the field, Nuong stood at the edge of her task, her hands stained with the earth's embrace, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the river met the sky. The rain had begun to fall, a gentle drizzle that kissed her skin, its droplets a tender reminder of the love she held in her heart. She thought of the broken bowl, its shattered pieces a symbol of her fractured dreams, of the money Nuong had stolen, a theft that had become a mirror to her suffering. "When will I be free?" she whispered, her voice a soft lament, her heart a garden of longing, its flowers wilting under the weight of her toil. She thought of Chung, of the promise that glowed in his eyes, of the life they might have together, a life where the rain would not seep through the roof, where the river would sing of freedom, not sorrow. The rain, a mirror to her tears, fell softly, its rhythm a melody of hope. "Will he find me?" she murmured, her voice a fragile thread, her heart a tapestry of hope and fear, her hands trembling as she clutched the hoe, its weight a reminder of her bondage, its presence a testament to her resilience. Would Chung find her, his flame piercing the storm of her suffering, or would his worry consume him, leaving him lost in the shadows of his own despair? Would Nuong hold fast to the hope that bloomed within her, its roots deep in the soil of her heart, or would the weight of her reality crush her spirit? The rain offered no answers, only its tender embrace, and the river sang on, its silver ribbon a bridge between two hearts, a whisper of a love that refused to fade. For now Nuong had the field, the rain, and the memory of a man whose love was her light, a flame that flickered in the storm, a promise that whispered of dawn, a hope that refused to die.